Hey guys, what's cracking? We are back today with another video for Team Building University. Before we get into team building construct videos, I want to get into more team building theory, team building conceptual stuff. I feel like while it is good to know how to team build, I feel like a very superficial knowledge of team building, as in how you're kind of, I guess, how you're constructing your team will go a lot better if you understand a lot of the in-depth, or maybe not even necessarily that in-depth, but just a lot of the concepts behind what you're doing. If I just spit at you, a balanced team needs a wall, a physical wall, a special wall, a sweeper, a cleaner, a lead, and a utility mon. Like, cool, but what does that mean to you? What is that going to mean if all I don't want to just be giving you a formula. I want to be giving you an understanding of why that formula is being employed, and that because once you understand that kind of the way you're doing it, like the process of building a team, you can understand a little more in depth about the decisions you're making, about the finesse and the nuances that go into team building, as in maybe a certain core will function better against certain archetypes. So without further ado, today we're going to be getting into the team archetype video, team archetype spectrum specifically. What the archetype spectrum is actually before we get into that, what I want to talk about is competitive theory. There's this concept in Pokemon theory, and it's been going. It's an endless debate. Still goes on today. I've done a lot of research into it for this particular video actually, and that question is, what is more important? How well of a team you have built, or how good of a player you are? And I feel like you can see very clearly both sides to each argument. Team building, what mons are you bringing, how well, like, if you have a team with all 6 Pokemon are weak to Stealth Rocks and you didn't bring a Hazard Clear, like, it doesn't matter how good of a player you are, you can't make that, it's going to be incredibly difficult to make that team work for you. But on the other side, if you are playing with, if you're a terrible player, it doesn't matter if you're playing with Ubermons, an OU player will beat you if you don't know how to, like, you can get beat with a straight Ubers team. One second. Ooh, sorry. You could be using an all Ubers team and get beat by a UU team if you don't know what to do. So this is a debate that's been raging for a while now, and I did a lot of research into different schools of thought on it, and ultimately what I came up with isn't a very good answer because it depends. It depends specifically on where on the ladder you currently are, and that's basically what it depends on because. Or at least what kind of opponents you're facing, I should say. So generally in Showdown, that's dictated by where on the ladder you are. So after much discussion and research, what I finally came up with is that ultimately, if you want to become a competitive player and that is your goal intent, in higher levels of play, proper team building will be the most important determinant of a match. Now, some people might be scratching their heads at that. Does that mean, am I saying that how good you are doesn't matter? But you really need to understand what I'm saying, that in higher levels of play. What this means is that in an article I came across, it talked about how on any given Pokemon turn of a Pokemon match, each team will have one ideal move. There's always one best move that each team can perform. Obviously, nuances like prediction and stuff like meta-analysis of the game can start to play into that. But every turn, there's ultimately going to be one best move that each side can do. And in a higher level of play, you can almost always consistently find and execute that move. And if both players are playing, like let's say 90 to 95% of the time you are clicking there is a correct move. And if you are clicking that correct move 90 to 95% of the time, what will ultimately determine the outcome of the match is going to be not how good you are, because you're both doing making the correct plays. What's going to ultimately determine the match is going to be how well of a team you built. And this is my opinion. Obviously, it's not 100% airtight, and it's always up for discussion. That's why this discussion is still going on. It's been going on forever, because both sides have arguments against each other, and both sides have very good arguments supporting their own. However, this is what I have kind of come across, that when both players are executing the best possible move every turn, what's going to matter more in the grand scheme of things is going to be having built a proper team. That said, I want you to guys keep in mind that in higher levels of play that's the only place where this is very applicable, because when you're in places, let's say lower ladder on Showdown, first of all, you don't know what kind of opponents you're going to be running into. You could be running into players who are currently laddering and will be getting up into the 1800s or something, but they're just on the low ladder right now. Or who playing against players who are using like only evolutions or something, or like using like a Pokemon of team that they like but aren't necessarily the most competitive, you know? So player skill determines it up to a point, and once you reach, let's say, I would say around 1600, 1700 plus on the ladder, I would say over 1700-ish on the ladder, player skill stops mattering as much, and proper team building starts to matter more. Because you'll hear, if you watch videos of guys like PokeGameMD or Blunder or Shofu, like these guys who play on higher up on the ladder, that they'll make statements like, "Why does this team get 6-0'd by blank? Why is this happening? Like what? Like," or they'll be like, "Why do I just lose now?" Or "I'm just gonna lose now." And what that kind of plays into is that fact that what they're kind of referencing, that I think a lot of less experienced players don't understand, is what they are referencing is the fact that a lot of times the game is decided by team matchup right off the bat, because both players, you have to assume, are skilled enough to make that good move. So team matchup is going to decide the result of the end result of the game right off the bat. And when that isn't kept in mind, that leads me to believe personally that team building is going to be the more important aspect of a Pokemon battle in higher levels of competitive play. Now, again, that's my opinion. You're welcome to discuss it with me. I'd love to hear about it in the comment section below, what you guys think. I'd love to have a good debate about that, because I think this is definitely something that is open for contention. But part of this research that I said makes me glad that I've been doing a video on Team Building University, because it makes me feel like, you know, teaching players how to properly team build is going to be vital in a player really trying to learn about competitive play. So, you know, I'm glad that hopefully I'll be able to help some people out, help them really improve their game. And between this and other videos that I'm making about, let's say, like competitive encyclopedia, you'll be able to implement those on a grand scale into your competitive play and improve as a player in all fronts, team building and skill-wise. Moving on from this slide, though, finally we're going to look into the archetype spectrum. Now, the archetype spectrum goes into two different directions, and that's the directions of defense and offense. It's a very, you know, linear progression. The more defense you have, the less offense you have. The more offense you have, the less defense you have. But both play styles, these are kind of two very broad groupings of how a player will play their game. A defensive player will play with more switches, will use more utility moves, such as, let's say, taunt or status or hazards or stuff like that. They will have higher usage of recovery, so that's moves like soft boiled, wish. They're again going to have higher defenses and lower offenses. That kind of goes without saying. Because the Pokemon are generally not as offensively present, they also don't need to have as much speed, so you're going to see a lot of slower Pokemon. So the goal of defense, if you watch my video on pressure and momentum, the goal of a defensive team is to slow down the opponent's momentum, constantly exerting a slowdown in their pressure. That's how defense works, is like you aren't trying to necessarily create your own momentum, you're trying to stop your opponents. And therefore, through switches and the usage of proper Pokemon checks, and to stop opponents' momentum, you're going to see a lot more greater utilization of type advantage. Players playing defensively want to have the type advantage at all times so that they can avoid their defensive Pokemon getting overwhelmed by super effective attacks. When we look at offense, we start to see less switches. Offensive Pokemon generally don't like to switch into attacks, and therefore won't be switching in and out a lot. Offensive playstyle will see more like a win condition type playstyle, where players say, "This is how I'm going to win this game. This is what sequence of moves I'm going to perform. What situation I need to be in to perform said moves." Of course, if you guys want to clear up any of these, go look in Competitive Encyclopedia. As a lot of the concepts I'm talking about in this video will have been touched on in Competitive Encyclopedia. Offensive teams will see more usage of attacks and higher offense, lower defenses. Those ones are kind of obvious, but you're going to see faster Pokemon, because faster Pokemon tend to won't get hit, hopefully, and be able to knock out your opposing Pokemon before they have to take much damage. The goal of offense is to put constant pressure on your opponent, which is the opposite of defense. So, whereas an offensive team will try to put constant pressure on the opponent and keep momentum going throughout the match for their side, a defensive team's goal will be to slow down and stop that momentum. And then you get into interesting stuff when you start playing defense versus defense or offense versus offense. Offense versus offense tends to be just games of like 10, 15, 20, like less than 20 turns on average. Pokemon just setting up and wrecking stuff. Getting in, it's like win condition after win condition. Whereas two defensive teams, a lot of time playing against each other, will go like 200, 300 turns or something, because neither team has the offensive presence to pressure, and because neither team has the ability to create pressure and create momentum, nothing is ever going to happen. But because they don't tend to be switching out as much, you're also going to see offensive Pokemon making greater utilization of coverage moves. This goes hand in hand with the fact that defense uses more usage of utility. Because you have 4 move slots on each Pokemon, you're going to see that you have to pick what 4 moves to use. So offensive Pokemon obviously will be picking offensive moves, coverage moves, while defensive Pokemon will be picking up utility moves, recovery moves, so on and so forth. So here we have a very linear view of defense and offense, and I want to get into the 5. Here's what I want to talk about: the archetype spectrum. While we talk about what defense and offense are, there are what I would say 5 main categories that can be grouped together in naming team archetypes. Each type of these definitely has subtypes. It isn't clear cut like this. I say 5, and I think that 5 is a fair number to group it into, but I by no means say that there are only 5, and each one has kin categories and can be, you could also break these up in different ways. But getting into it, I just want to look at where each type that you might hear commonly people referring to, where these different team building archetypes fall into. First of all, we're going to have Stall. Stall is basically the most defensive playstyle, centered around killing all of your opponent's momentum, continuing to let them match, forcing them to just keep making switches that they shouldn't be making as an offensive team, and you switching in and out of them, using utility moves to slowly wear down and whittle down your opponent. Games with a stall tactics-based team will generally run between 60 and 150 turns, which is why a lot of players get really mad when they see Stall on the ladder, because Stall players tend to just be very looked down upon. I think people will make a lot unfair assessment of Stall in that it requires no skill. I don't think that's true, because I think making proper switches and good moves, I think the best Stall players utilize skill to make good calls about what their opponent's going to do and switch in and out accordingly, help to whittle down their opponent. Whereas an unskilled Stall player might struggle, because to play Stall effectively, you have to have a very good understanding of how to play both offense and Stall, I think, together, because you have to understand the mindset of your opponent a lot. But that can be said for any type, I should say. Moving on, we have... what happened? We have Bulky Balance. Bulky Balance tends to be a slightly more offensive play style, but still very generally quite a defensive style. Still utilizing more switches, but the occasional attack might be thrown in. Games with the Bulky Balance team will generally take between, I would say, 40 and 70 turns. And this is a pretty rare playstyle, as players who are already gravitating towards the defensive end generally go all the way towards Stall, so Bulky Balance isn't a playstyle that you're going to see a lot. But Pokemon like Ferrothorn fit well in this playstyle, is there a Pokemon that can utilize a strong Power-Up or Knockoff or Gyro Ball, along with giving you a lot of access to good utility, which is what teams like Bulky Balance are looking for. Finally, we have True Balance. Balance is the playstyle that I personally, this is what I played for the longest time, and I still a lot of time prefer Balance. Balance teams are generally both have some offensive presence and some defensive presence, and I would really recommend, honestly, to any new players who are getting into Showdown to start off with a balanced team. While balanced teams, I wouldn't say don't require skill to play, it is the easiest style to understand, because you are able to use both defensive and offensive Pokemon, and you are able to figure out what it is in Pokemon you like. What if you get to find out, maybe I don't like making switches, maybe I like putting constant pressure on my opponent, then maybe you're going to want to go towards the offensive side of the spectrum. But maybe you don't like making those offensive plays. Maybe you don't like making plays in general. Maybe you just want to play defensively. You like your opponent to come to you. You like to try to put down their pressure. In that case, maybe you want to go towards defense. So that's what I like about new players getting into Balance, that they can quickly learn what they are into, which is what Balance is so good for, because you get to utilize all types. That said, Balance Pokemon tend to be generally pretty bulky. Pokemon like Tyranitar, like Heatran, like honestly like Ferrothorn, but also slightly more offensive Pokemon like Bisharp can fit well on balanced teams. These are Pokemon that are going to be able to launch some strong attacks in different situations, but balanced teams will be able to utilize a lot more switching than our most offensive teams would otherwise, as they can utilize their type advantage more effectively when they can switch into Pokemon that can take hits, which is something that Balance is able to do, but offense is not. Moving on, we have Bulky Offense. Bulky Offense is going to be slightly more switch-based than Balance, or than a higher-end offense team, but bulky offense, again, won't be able to switch quite as well as a balanced or defensive team would. Pokemon like Manaphy, like Scarf Tyranitar, a lot of Assault Vest users like Assault Vest Conkeldurr can fit well into bulky offense teams. You're going to be Pokemon that you can rely on to take hits, but can dish out a lot of damage. Pokemon like Wall Breakers are going to fit really well on bulky offense teams. And actually, I would say bulky offense is a very predominant playstyle on the ladder right now, especially now that Mega Sableye is getting suspected, at least right now. Who knows what's going to happen? It looks like Mega Sableye won't be banned in the grand scheme of things. There we go. But for now, while the suspect ladder is going on, bulky offense tends to be a very bulky offense, and the next category tend to be very predominant because Sableye was such a big part of a very crazy strong stall team, which is of course why it got suspected. Finally, we have Hyper Offense. Hyper Offense is a super fast playstyle. Something I didn't say. Balanced Pokemon games usually take between 30 and 60 turns. I would say a bulky offense team might take between 20 and 50-ish. And a hyper offense team will very rarely go over 30 turns. Very rarely, if even. A lot of times the game will be around 15 to 20 turns. Hyper offense teams are all about pushing momentum on your opponent, pushing pressure, constantly. It's kind of like, think about it like if stall is about kind of like demotivating your opponent into submission, hyper offense is about pummeling them into submission. It's kind of one way to think about it. It's a very hard play style to get into for new players, so I wouldn't recommend Hyper Offense until you know a good deal about the meta, because Hyper Offense, as we move towards the right further and further, we start to get more towards win condition-based play, which is hard to understand if you don't know a lot about the meta, so I would say Balance is a really good place to start, and as you warm up, shift towards bulky offense, towards hyper offense. I myself don't even feel completely comfortable playing hyper offense yet. I consider myself nowadays more of a bulky offense player. I like to use teams that use like Mega Metacham, Manaphy, Bisharp, stuff like that. But yeah, so hyper offense is a very fun playstyle, very exciting to watch, which is the reason why I've been pushing myself to practice hyper offense, because I know that when people watch me play live, they don't like to see bulky balance or balanced teams doing a bunch of switching in games going for 40 turns. You guys want to see action. So I've been trying to get better at hyper offense, and so nowadays I play kind of bulky offense games. So this is something I actually put a lot of work into. I discussed it with a lot of people what their thoughts on the matter were. And so what I kind of wanted to figure out was there are three main archetypes of team on the spectrum, which if we look at it, we have, I would say there's stall, balance, and hyper offense are the three. Like, it's really just defense, offense, and balance. Oh, my bad. In the grand scheme of things. And I was thinking a lot about this, and I talked to a lot of people, and I was trying to figure out, is there like a rock, paper, scissors type thing where each team style matches up better against another? And what I came up with is that balance, offense, and defense all do have some level of advantage over each other in some way. No type is ever completely overpowered, I would say, although the meta does shift. What I will say is that what happens here is that, let's start with balanced teams. A balanced team is generally able to switch around and put enough offensive pressure on an offensive team that it won't be able to gain. The offensive team won't be able to gain enough momentum to stop the balanced team. They have the bulk to take hits and then retaliate very hard to the fragile Pokemon of offense. So balanced teams can generally break down offense teams. Offense teams are generally able to overwhelm defensive teams. This means that a lot of offensive teams are able to use cleaners, wall breakers, sweepers to just pummel defensive teams until they're no longer able to make switches safely, and at that point a cleaner can come in and just start knocking heads together. And finally, we look at defense. Balance is unable to overwhelm defense, so defense is able to stall out balance. This is, of course, very broad, but I did discuss this with a lot of people, and while this was my original conclusion, what I ultimately found is that this doesn't actually work. So why did I just explain that, you might be wondering? I wanted to get into that because I wanted to explain that while certain team types could be considered to have advantages, in the grand scheme of things, if you know how to play Pokemon and you know how to team build, you can overcome any type of team matchup. A good, well-built team, which is what I'm trying to help you guys do, is going to be able to match up and beat any other team. So with that in mind, I don't want you guys to be like, oh, I'm playing balanced, I'm always going to lose against defense. That isn't true. If you're a balanced team that wants to beat defense, bring Stallbreaker Mew, bring Stallbreaker Talonflame, bring a strong Calm Mind Manaphy with, or like a Rain Dance Manaphy to bust down Clefable. You know, there are ways, if you team build properly, balanced teams can beat defensive teams. Offensive teams can beat balanced teams. Defensive teams can beat offensive teams. You know, this is not an end-all be-all by any means. If you take what I'm saying and you take your experience on the ladder, I think, and you watch videos of good players in the game, or watch these videos that I make. Go play Pokemon. That's the best thing you can do, is go play Pokemon, and you'll start to understand trends. You'll start to understand how to build properly to overwhelm things that your team would have otherwise struggled with. Let's say like your offensive team is really struggling to break down the fire, water, grass defensive core the balanced teams really use, and then you start to realize, oh, you know what might actually be able to beat these things is Mega Lopunny. Except then you start to realize, let's say, Mega Venusaur can still counter Mega Lopunny pretty effectively, physically defensive, which is a very big staple on balanced and even sometimes defensive teams. So then you start to think, okay, maybe I need a strong Psychic type. Maybe I'll throw in, let's say, Alakazam. I don't know. You start to see like where that goes. Like you start to see like all of a sudden this team like rock paper scissors type deal starts to mean a lot less once you become good. So that's ultimately my goal with this. I hope this video is helpful, guys. I put a lot of work into this one specifically, but you know, I am really excited about this stuff. This is one of my favorite things in Pokemon, is team building. So if you guys have any questions, any comments, any disagreements with me, please feel free to leave it in the comment section below. As always, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff makes me very happy, and I really appreciate it. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk about this with anybody who wants to leave a comment in the section below. And yeah, I hope